Shalom, everybody. How you doing, my dear Kollel friends? Sorry I'm not able to be with you live and in person today. The school where I teach at later this afternoon called for a final staff meeting, which we all have to attend. So it's called for 8:30, 9 o'clock. So I asked Bruce if it's a better idea to record it than just to not have any class, and he said better to record it. So today I'm not looking at any eye-catching tshuvot. The second part of today will include a 3 years ago Facebook Live that I did about the 5 Derech Eretz lessons found in Parshat Korach, which we read, today's Sunday, we read yesterday in Shul. And so today, being that that was not about a tshuva, an eye-catching tshuva, I thought I would do something a little bit similar and talk a little bit about the various sins that Bnei Israel are doing in the desert during the almost length of the book of Bamidbar, which is very, very strange, very exciting. Not so exciting for the Jews, for the men who lost their lives in the desert. But I would say that if somebody said, the book of Vayikra, what is that all about? You could probably summarize it in one word and say it's about Kedusha. It's about holiness. How do we achieve it? What do we do to get there? What kinds of holy things do we participate in? Korbanot, etc., etc. Somebody said to me, well, name one word that would describe the book of Bamidbar. I would say sin. Other mefarshim, other commentaries may say something very different, but it seems like from the point of the parsha of Beha'alotcha all the way till almost the end, it seems that every parsha has some major league sin that the Jewish people are involved in. So I want to take a look at that because I think I'm going to be able to share with you some things that you may not have heard or learned before. And in that way, it'll be eye-catching, even though it's not a tshuva. So I want to start in Parshat Beha'alotcha. This is chapter 10, Parak Yud, beginning with verse 33. And we want to take a look at these inverted nuns. You're probably familiar with them, these inverted nuns that appear. Chapter 10, verse 34, 35, 35, 36. And the reason that the nuns, the inverted opposite nuns appear is, according to our commentaries, to set off those two verses so as to not create 3 sins in a row. So if we have 3 sins in a row that are recorded by the Jewish people in the desert, it kind of becomes a chazakah, it becomes a pattern that we want to not have that kind of a pattern of sinning by the Jewish people. And so the Torah thought it would be a good idea to talk about one sin, have these 2 verses with the inverted nuns offset the other 2 as more than just 2 others, and then continue with the other 2 and the rest of the sins that we find in the book of Bamidbar. Now, the big question is, okay, that's interesting. What is the first sin that we want to offset by the 2 nuns? And that, my dear friends, is hardly clear. So, for example, you read in chapter 10, verse 33, Vayis'u mehar Hashem. After about a year of being at Har Sinai, the Jewish people are now given permission by Hashem to move on. You've been here for a while, you've learned, you've studied, you've focused on the mitzvot. Moshe has been teaching, and now it's time to move along in your journey throughout the desert. And that's what the pasuk says, Vayis'u mehar Hashem, and they journeyed away from the Har Hashem, from the mountain of Hashem, which is Har Sinai. So some of the commentaries identified that as the very first sin of the Jewish people, the first of the upcoming 3, the very first sin. And what is the first sin? Well, they point to the word mehar. They were given permission to go from the mountain of Mehar, from the mountain of Sinai. And some commentaries said, being that there's no punctuation in the Torah, that could be read as the word maher, which is slowly dissipating. This is maher. Yeah. Maher means quickly, quickly. And some of the commentaries mention that as soon as Hashem gave them that permission to keep moving and to move away from Har Sinai, they went away like children listening to a school bell. 3 o'clock school bell, boom, and they're out of that room. They don't linger. They're not staying any longer. They don't want to hear any more. Perhaps they'll get more homework. So it's better to leave at the bell, and off they go. So some of the commentaries say that was the sin. Maher, they left too quickly. And they wanted to get out of there, which is not a nice way to treat Hashem or his mountain. The only problem with that is it doesn't say Maher. It says Mehar. They left from the mountain of Sinai. So the question is, if so, it doesn't say Maher, it doesn't say quickly. So what was their sin? What did they do? And you have to go to the book of Devarim, the very early part of Devarim, the very first few verses of the book of Devarim, where Moshe is repeating a lot of the history of the last 40 years. And what he has to say is highlighted by a commentary called Me'am Loez. I think I've mentioned Me'am Loez several times during our Kollel Shiurim, and I've also mentioned that Me'am Loez now comes in a female version called Me'am Louise, and that gets a laugh or a titter from some of you. In any case, the Me'am Loez is going to tell us pretty much what their sin was, and we're going to be very surprised. So if you look at the book of Devarim, the very first chapter, verse 7, it refers to this idea that God said to them, okay, move along now. You have my permission. You don't have to stay. But what does Moshe say that God said at that time? Apparently what we have in the book of Bamidbar may be incomplete because Moshe recalls it very differently. It says, again, chapter Aleph, the first chapter in Devarim, verse 7. Moshe reminds the people that God said to you at that time, Penu useu lachem. Penu useu lachem, which means Hashem said, turn yourselves around and journey. Turn yourselves around and journey. So what does that mean? It means to say, don't leave this mountain rapidly. And when leaving, not only this holy mountain, but when leaving holy people, when leaving scholars of any gender, when leaving great, great people, leave them slowly and turn around to them and always have your face to them. So, for example, when we get an aliyah at the Torah and we descend from the Aron Kodesh, many people have the custom, which I think is the correct custom, is that to not turn our back on the Aron Kodesh, but to walk away facing it and to slowly walk away from that holy presence. So this is what Moshe is reminding the people here in Devarim, Penu useu, turn yourselves around and then journey. So now the Me'am Loez is going to give us a little bit of a clue as to what their first sin is. What was their first sin? All they did was se'u. All they did was move away from it, but they didn't penu, which means they didn't turn themselves around. I'll tell you, when I made Aliyah, right before we made Aliyah, I was leaving my shul of 9.5 years. And on my very last day of being in the office in the shul, I walked out of the building. I locked up because it was late at night. I had to box a whole bunch of stuff. I walked out, went to my car, and turned around and faced the shul as though this sentiment has a lot of meaning, power, emotion for me. It wasn't just walking away from any plain building. This is a place where I invested 9.5 years of avodat kodesh, of holy work. And I had a lump in my throat, and I'll be honest with you, I nearly cried. It's a long time to give and invest. And so that's what I did. I penu useu. I turned around, looked at it, as if to say this was a wholly valuable enterprise for me, hopefully for the people in the shul who were members and others. But I couldn't leave without turning around one last time and taking a look. Like this is an important, sentimental, and emotional moment. So according to Rav Kollel, who is the author of Me'am Lo'ez in the 1730s, he says that was their first sin. They just walked away without turning around, without indicating to Hashem that this place meant something, without indicating to Hashem that they had invested about a year being here, learning, studying, and that was their first sin. Very, very interesting. Sin number 2 comes right after that. Sin number 2 is also in chapter 10 of the book of Bamidbar. We looked at it in the portion of Baalotcha. And here comes sin number 2. This is now chapter 11, verse 1. Vayehi ha'am ke mitonenim. Ke mitonenim. Translated, the people took to seeking complaints. Ke mitonenim. Which many of the commentators say, why doesn't it say, and now the people were mitonenim? They were complainers. Now, who was complaining? Wasn't your average Jew, as far as we understand. It was, we call the Erev Rav. This was the mixed multitudes, the Datan and Abirams. This is the Edgar G. Robinsons of the movie. These are the complainers, the Nachschleppers. The one, by the way, this is the group that Hashem said to Moshe, don't take these people. Don't take them with you. It's only going to give you trouble. And for some reason, Moshe insisted, no, they've got to come along. Maybe Moshe felt he could change them. He could make them into different people. They might have his influence and change their lives and not complain all the time. Who knows why Moshe felt, even against God's best judgment, he felt that he still will take the Erev Rav along with him, even though Hashem said, not a good idea. Okay, so here they are, and the Torah calls them ke mitonenim. These were people who were like complainers, which indicates that they weren't actually complainers. And the question is, what does that mean? Because this is going to be their second sin out of 3. So Rashi says they needed a pretext to complain, to distance themselves from Hashem. And we find out from other commentaries that this is often the case when everything is done for you. So, for example, in the desert, we understand from our commentaries that didn't have to lift too much of a finger to get anything done. Their clothes were made for them. The food was available for them from the manna that rained from heaven. And everything was done for them. You know, they didn't have to walk too far. And if they did, they were walking on the clouds that were under their feet. They had a pretty idyllic existence in the desert. And now they are complaining, perhaps, because they've got no challenges. They've got no hardships. So they weren't really complainers. They just needed a context to complain because they weren't doing a whole lot for themselves. They didn't have to invest time or money or energy in doing a whole lot because so much was done for them. So what's left in that kind of a day? What's left is to complain. And many psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, and other people in the healthcare field will say to people who are constantly complaining, they will say to them, I bet you don't have work. Or I bet you don't have a hobby. Or I bet you don't do chesed. And how do we know that's a good bet? Because people who have little or nothing to do resort to complaining. And that's exactly what they did. They complained, hey, we have no meat here. Hey, in Egypt, we ate all kinds of good things. Yeah, like what was it, Slave Caterers Incorporated? I doubt it. I don't know what they were going through when they said to Moshe, oh, we had the greatest food, and we had leeks, and we had melons, and yeah. My feeling, a nechtige Tag. You ever hear that phrase? Yeah, like you had fine quality food. I think you're You know, who who knows what you're thinking about? You're hallucinating if you think you had such great food. That's my own personal opinion. In any case, they were complaining there wasn't enough food. It wasn't good. The man, we had enough of it. It's disgusting already. So that was their third sin of complaining about the fact that there is no food. And then comes what we read last week, Shlach Lecha, the Meraglim. The spies came back with a terrible report, except for two, Kalev and Yehoshua. And Moshe just tells them, listen, go and get facts. Get facts on the ground. What's doing? Is it a strong land? Is it a good land? Can you get produce? Can you plant and reap? What kind of people are living there? What kind of a challenge, etc.? He just wanted facts. Only the facts, ma'am. If you remember from Dragnet. One of their sins was they came back not with facts, but opinions. And who asked them for opinions? They didn't just report, they gave opinions. Vayelchu vayavo el Moshe v'el Aaron v'el kol adat b'nei Israel. This is another aspect of their sin with the Meraglim, these spies. They didn't just give opinions when they weren't asked for opinions, but when they returned after 40 days sojourn in Eretz Israel, the land of Canaan, it says they came, they went to Moshe, who sent them on this mission, ve'al Aaron, and to Aaron, who might have also participated in saying, go ahead, do what Moshe says. But here's another downfall. Ve'al kol adat b'nei Yisrael. And they gave their report in front of the entirety of the congregation. Is that a proper way to do it? The short answer is no. You're sent on a mission, you report to the people who sent you on the mission. You don't report to the board of directors. You don't report to the trustees. You report to the president or the CEO who sent you. And once you do that, if the president or the CEO feel that you should report to the entire board of trustees or board of directors, that's a whole different thing. But what are you trying to achieve by bringing this negative report, not just to the heads, Moses and Aaron, but now you want to give this entire downcast, insulting report about Eretz Israel to the people? That indicates a very, very nasty agenda. And that was certainly not appreciated. What's another thing that they did that wasn't appreciated? They came back with very nice produce. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. Look at its produce, right? If you buy Carmel wines, that's the label. It's on the label, that logo of people carrying two poles with a huge cluster of grapes. And that's exactly what the Meraglim, that's exactly what the spies said. This place, look at the produce. Isn't that amazing? Look how huge it is. What a special country. Except they didn't really mean that. They knew that if you want people to believe something that's a little bit unbelievable, you have to start with a little truth, and then you can exaggerate. They started with a little truth. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. Look at the produce. Isn't that huge? But then they made another sin, another pitfall, with the very next word in their report. Ephes. But. You and I know that every time we hear somebody talk about something, they may say the most glowing things. And when we hear the word but, what does that mean? It almost means forget about every nice thing that I said. I want you to focus on this negativity. Forget the nice. Here comes negativity. But Ephes means nothing. Everything we just said, consider it as nothing because the main part of the report is happening now. The insulting part, the deprecating part about Eretz Israel. What does the Kotzker Rebbe say about this? He says, when they said to Moshe and Aaron and to the entire nation of Israel, we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so were we in their eyes. In our own eyes, we felt tiny. We felt very, very little. We felt so practically worthless. And we must have appeared that way in the eyes of the people in the land. Wow. How did they know that? What, they quizzed everybody, they interviewed everybody and said, how do you feel about us? Do you think of us as grasshoppers like we think of ourselves as grasshoppers? Is that what they did? Not likely. But that was their self-perception. The Kotzker Rebbe says they lost their focus on the purpose of their mission and instead focused on their own insecurities. On their own insecurities. So, some say, what happened to these choicest of men? Except for Kollel and Yehoshua, these other 10, they were also great people, men of integrity, men of honesty, men of scholarship. What happened to them that they came back with such a terrible report? Well, some commentaries say that indeed they were outstanding men of great stature. Here's the clue as to what their problem was. Rashi says on the phrase kulam anashim, they were all men of great stature. Rashi says ota sha'a kisherim hayu. At that hour, they were all kosher, meaning they left with integrity. At that hour, they left with integrity. They left with respect. Something happened. But that hour, they left at the top of the world. So they came back with a terribly catastrophic report. They swayed the nation. That night was the night of Tisha B'Av. Hashem said, tonight you cry for nothing. I'll give you reasons to cry. And Nebuch, 2022, 2023, we're still likely, unless things change drastically, we're still likely to be commemorating Tisha B'Av this year because of what happened all the way back then. So some people tried to explain their behavior. Some people said, maybe they were afraid to lose their connection with Hashem. Because on the one hand, here they are in the desert. Everything is done for them, and they feel a strong connection. But once they go into Eretz Yisrael, they'll have to work for everything, and they won't feel that connection, that spiritual connection, as much as they did in the desert. Other commentators said they were afraid of losing their prestige. Their ego got in the way. In the desert, they knew their job. In a new place, they may be dispensable and replaceable. And here's my take on it. And you may have seen this in some commentary, but I don't know that I have. Here's my take on it. This will end this segment of today's Kollel Shir. My take on it is what Rashi says. At that hour, they were kasher people. Integrity, respected. You could trust them. Why didn't it say at that time, at that day, at that week? It says at that hour. What can we learn from that? I think the lesson we can learn from that is a very important lesson, that our righteousness, our tzidkut, needs to be monitored on a regular basis, like hourly basis. Our spiritual lives are fragile, as we see by these spies. They were superb models of righteousness and Yirat Shamayim. And all of that crashed in a proverbial instant. And that's how it happens. Pirkei Avot says, don't believe in yourself until the day you die. Don't believe in your spiritual level, because that can disappear in an hour. That's how fragile we are. Righteousness is hard to sustain. We can have it now, but it may not be around an hour from now. And that's a very important lesson. We can't rest on yesterday's spiritual laurels. We have to buff and polish our spirituality almost every hour. And I think that's a very important lesson. Dear friends, Bruce and Arthur are going to start with the next segment. Thank you so much for being with me today and being all together. And God willing, we'll be together again next week. Shalom, and stay tuned. In just a moment, another segment. Bye-bye. Stay happy, healthy, and safe.